On June 17, 1972, 5 men were arrested for breaking into the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee at the Watergate Hotel and Office Complex in Washington, D.C. 2 of the arrested men were discovered to have links to President Richard Nixon's re-election organization. However, the burglars denied being part of some wider political conspiracy. But only months later, the true consequences of the Watergate break-in would emerge. The burglars were sentenced for their crime in January 1973, and they weren't happy about it. One of them, former CIA officer E. Howard Hunt, had been demanding large sums of money to buy his silence. Another of the burglars, James McCord, had also been a CIA agent. McCord decided that he wouldn't tolerate being a scapegoat. After sentencing, McCord wrote a letter to the presiding judge revealing that high-ranking Republicans associated with President Nixon had known about the break-in at the Watergate. The letter was a bombshell. On April 30th, 1973, in an effort to seem like he was punishing the people responsible for the Watergate break-in, President Nixon requested the resignations of his 2 closest aides, Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman and his domestic policy advisor John Ehrlichman. Nixon also fired his White House counsel, John Dean. To protect himself, Dean started cooperating with Watergate investigators who were working for the U.S. Senate. The Senate began public hearings about the Watergate affair in May 1973. Dean revealed that he discussed with President Nixon the Watergate break-in and the cover-up, including Howard Hunt's demand for hush money. Testifying to the Senate in July 1973, Nixon aide Alexander Butterfield confirmed the existence of a tape recording system in the Oval Office of the White House, which Nixon had installed in 1971. That is, everything that was said in the Oval Office was tape recorded. So the tapes were subpoenaed by both the Senate Watergate Committee and by Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, but Nixon refused to turn the tapes over. In October 1973, Nixon tried to derail the Watergate investigations. Nixon ordered the Attorney General Elliot Richardson to fire Archibald Cox. Richardson resigned rather than comply. The top 2 law enforcement officers in the country had just resigned to protest Nixon's order to fire the man responsible for investigating possible criminal wrongdoing in the White House. This was the so-called Saturday Night Massacre. At the end of April 1974, instead of handing over the tapes, Nixon released edited transcripts of the tape recordings, hoping that doing so would be considered an acceptable compromise. It wasn't. In July 1974, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Nixon must turn over the tapes. Between July 27th and the 30th of 1974, the House Judiciary Committee adopted 3 articles of impeachment against President Nixon for obstruction of justice, misuse of power, and failure to comply with subpoenas from the House of Representatives. On August 8, 1974, President Nixon announced his resignation in a televised address. It's never been proven that President Nixon ordered the break-in at the Watergate or knew that it would happen. What has been proven, however, is that Nixon was heavily involved in the cover-up right from the very start. On June 23, 1972, only 6 days after the break-in, Nixon's own taping system recorded him advising his assistants to try to use the CIA to block the FBI's investigation in the Watergate break-in.